back to the BMF's YouTube channel. I'm talking today with Paul Morgan, who's our Government Relations Executive Officer. Very posh title, Paul. We're in the midst of the general election campaign, and the BMF has got its own manifesto that we are using to lobby politicians, etc. with. Paul, you developed this. You want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Steve. So the manifesto is something we've been working on for actually about the last 6 months, working very closely with the National Motorcyclists Council, putting together what would be our future strategy for motorcycling across the UK, which we could then use as a blueprint for working with the next government, for working with politicians to deliver what we hope will be a bright and sustainable future for UK motorcycling.
Great. So the manifesto is sort of broken up into sections. We start with the case for powered two-wheelers, as we've got to call this sort of general category of that bikes fit within, and then we get on to immediately transport policy. I've been interested in this. I looked at the future of transport document for Wales, and motorcycles weren't even mentioned as a form of transport in that document. So where have the UK government been historically in terms of recognising motorcycles as a legitimate and valuable part of
Well, I think, Steve,
you've
hit the nail on the head there, in that of late and in recent years, motorcycling hasn't featured as prominently as it should have done within government transport policy. I mean, go back to the sort of post-war years, the 1950s, 1960s, 70s. It was sort of the halcyon days for motorcycling, when motorcycles were an affordable entry into transport, and were respected, and there were a lot of them on the roads. And I think what's happened in more recent years is that transport policy has pretty much ignored motorcycling, and that's something which we want to change through the manifesto. And I think you'll see that the key priority which goes through, it's the golden thread which goes through all of the priorities within the manifesto, is to place motorcycling front and centre of future transport policy for the United Kingdom.
Okay, so there are some quite interesting things in the manifesto. For instance, lobbying for reform of the VED system, taking not only emissions but weight of vehicles into account. I think that would be, it interests me in that we know the weight of electric cars, for instance, are much heavier than standard internal combustion cars. Do you think this is something that we've got a real chance of becoming policy?
I think, Steve, I mean, at the moment the VED system's not fit for purpose. Technology's moved on. The sort of situation as you describe with electric cars has moved on, and you've got an interesting sort of anomaly at the moment where riders may be paying more in terms of road tax than car drivers driving much bigger and heavier vehicles. So what we're calling for is a review of the whole system, and I know that the previous government was starting to look at this, but the next administration really needs to look at this to bring in place a fair and equitable system which looks at not only emissions but road weight in terms of damage to the road, etc., and brings in place a system which is fair for all road users. So that's what we're going to be pushing for in the early days of the new administration.
Looking at environmental issues, I know if you go out on social media, there are plenty of people out there who are very sceptical about climate change, etc., which isn't the position of the BMF. Where are we in terms of the transition to net zero and going to fully electric motorcycles?
So, Steve, yeah, as you say, there's quite a lot of skeptics out there, but I think they're in the minority now. I think the evidence, scientific evidence, is overwhelming now. So the BMF position is that we want a sensible approach to decarbonisation and a move towards net zero in 2050. We want to work with government, but we want a more holistic look at this, because the previous government's sort of approach has been to look at purely the solution to get to net zero was a battery electric one. Actually, if you look at developments now in terms of synthetic fuels for etc., hydrogen cell, these are coming on leaps and bounds. And the BMF's position is that there shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all. There should be a technology-neutral approach to this, and we need to look at a balance between electric vehicles, electric motorbikes, synthetic fuels, hydrogen fuel cells, hybrid bikes, all of those sorts of options, because that's the only realistic way of getting towards 2050, which is a legal commitment for the UK.
Great. So there's a section in the manifesto which is, I think, important to all of us bikers, which is road safety. One of our own was actually involved in an accident where he was wiped out by a car just a couple of weeks ago. Back in the day, we had government campaigns like Clunk Click Every Trip and Think Bike, etc. Do you think that would be a helpful strategy in terms of motorcycle safety from the point of view of the BMF?
Most definitely, Steve. If you look at the statistics, they're pretty stark. Looking at motorbike accidents, serious accidents, killed or seriously injured, you're still now, in the present day, 45 times more likely to be involved in a serious accident as a motorcyclist than if you were in a car. And the majority of those accidents are actually down to the behaviour of other road users. So what is really, really important are these campaigns for other road users to look out, not only for motorbikes, but for cyclists and other vulnerable road users. The BMF is working very closely with, for example, Motorcycle Laws Scotland on their Take Another Look initiative, which is exactly in line with the Think Bike. We're also working with the Automobile Association on the Think Bike initiatives. And there needs to be more of that. There needs to be more public information out there and part of the driving test, for example, for car drivers, in terms of looking out for vulnerable road users, including motorcyclists, and taking that second look when pulling out at junctions where a lot of the accidents happen.
Yeah, and obviously I'm Welsh, speaking to you from sunny Wales here today, where our government decided to bring in a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, which they're now having to rethink. I've noticed in our manifesto that it talks about more hands-on traffic policing rather than enforcement cameras. And it was my concern all along with our 20-mile-an-hour speed limit that it was really a sticking plaster over a gaping wound, and that speed limits are without a likelihood of actually being stopped by the police. Speed limits really don't stop the lunatics, to put it bluntly, and I've seen several incidents, even in my locality, where people have been involved with accidents simply because of driving at ridiculous speeds. So I think for me this is quite an important issue, but it obviously requires extra funding to get more traffic police around the place.
I think that's right, Steve, and I think I've been to presentations by Welsh Transport where they've said themselves that a lot of the new speed limits are being ignored, and really the only solution is to have those speed limits aligned alongside with enforcement. Otherwise, people tend to ignore the speed limits which have been put in place. From a BMF perspective, and I think from a motorcycling perspective, there is a place for 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, particularly around schools, around hospitals, around homes for elderly people, for example. But it needs to be sensible, because if it's not sensible and it's a blanket approach, then you don't take people with you, and you need to take motorists and motorcyclists with you on that journey. There is a sensible place for it, but it needs to be accepted by everybody, and it needs to be a much more sensible approach than we've got at the moment. Just by sticking up 20-mile-an-hour signs isn't really going to achieve very much, because people will ignore it. and enforcement needs to go with it if you're serious about enforcing speed limits. And the BMF is fully on side in terms of sensible riding, which is within speed limits and protects all road users.
So what about the issue of the general condition of our roads? I know just a couple of days ago I was out on my bike and almost had an off because I hit a pothole. It seems just to be anecdotally getting worse and worse and worse. What really is the evidence out there, and where are we on that?
Well, the evidence is that the current state of the UK road sort of network, surfacing, etc., potholes is appalling, and it needs to be sorted out as a priority. The BMF is part of the pothole partnership with the National Motorcyclist Council, with the AA, with JCB, looking at permanent repairs to potholes, for example, with new innovative methods which have been deployed, which can fix potholes very, very quickly. But to move away from the patch and dash approach, which I'm sure a lot of our members have seen, where potholes are repaired, but a week later, after heavy rain, the hole's back again. What needs to be put in place is a permanent solution, which is properly funded. The previous government did announce significant funding, diverted from HS2, but that needs to continue with a permanent solution, but also monitoring of the local authorities and how they repair and the sort of progress that they make, so that we can have a good picture of what's happening across the UK. Of course, motorcyclists with just two wheels, two tyres, making contact with the road surface, it's really important that we have a good surface and that it's safe to ride. And so we are campaigning through the manifesto, and we've been working very hard with Department of Transport and the National Highways group to take forward these sort of measures and to ensure that our road network is safe for motorcyclists to ride on.
So one of our reps, Alex Parsons-House, did some research about commuting on two wheels to work, and said that the biggest reason why a lot of people don't take motorcycles into towns and cities for work is because of the fear of theft. So what are the BMF looking to see on that front in terms of local authorities and national governments?
So, Steve, theft is a real problem for motorbikes by their very nature. Easier to sort of lift up and stick in the back of a van, for example. So we've got a multi-pronged approach here. We're a member of the Motorcycle Crime Reduction Group. So we work through the MCIA with local police forces, looking at initiatives to tackle the crime groups involved in motorbike theft. And there has been some success there. I mean, it's small, but it's starting to happen in some regions, in the Midlands, in Kent, in Sussex, for example. So there's some good practice there which we need to spread to other regions. We're pushing for more resources for the police to actually target the criminal groups behind this who are stealing bikes, splitting them down for spares, shipping them abroad, all those sorts of things. And some police forces now have set up specialist groups to actually tackle the problem. So that's one thing that we're doing at the moment through the Motorcycle Crime Reduction Group to tackle this problem. But on top of that, we're working with local authorities. We want better parking for motorbikes. We want more secure areas, better lighting where people can sort of park, particularly when they're commuting and they're leaving in the dark, coming home in the dark, for example. So it's a sort of multi-pronged approach, working with law enforcement, working with other motorbike organisations, and working with local authorities to ensure that they put in place secure parking facilities for riders to park.
Great. So where can people find our manifesto?
So if you go onto the BMF website, you'll find the manifesto link there. Just click on that, takes you straight to it. You'll be able to see the 7 key priorities within the manifesto that we've set out, that will be taken forward with the new administration. Also, there's a link to the motorbike pledge, and we want riders to use that to get their prospective parliamentary candidates now in the run-up to the July the 4th election to sign up to the pledge that they, when they, should they be lucky enough to form the next government, that they will take forward the 7 priorities which we've set out and support motorcycling as a low polluting, cheap alternative for future transport policy.
Well, Paul Morgan, Government Relations Executive Officer, thank you very much for joining us. It's been great to talk to you today.
It's really good to speak with you, Steve. Thanks very much.